name is Dennis Minsky. You can tell the Portuguese last name. And I say we're all Irish on St. Patrick's Day, Mexican on Cinco de Mayo, but Portuguese today. And I was just thinking as I biked here, thousands of people walking down the street have no idea about this. They do not know what they're missing. We're in for a great cavalcade of readers, and these people are so great. I'm going to just read one tiny thing, because I got to get something out of this. So it's very short. According to Salvatore Del Deo, the first shellfish warden hired in Provincetown back in the 1950s was a retired Portuguese fisherman named Joe Ventura. Some of you know him. Before that, Joe had worked intermittently in a boat yard, helping to dig out fishing boats as they were hauled up for painting and repairs. He took his new job very seriously and scanned the West End flats daily to check for unauthorized clamming. One day, a non-clamming day, he spied a miscreant out there with a rake and a bucket. To his horror, it turned out to be Father Duarte. Now, Joe, Father Duarte said with a sheepish grin as he clambered up the rocks with his bucket of clams, I know it's not a clamming day, but the bishop is coming from Fall River tomorrow, and he specifically requested fresh clams. Couldn't you just look the other way? Now, Joe was a devout Catholic brought up to revere the clergy. But a job is a job. Father, he said, in a soft, quavering voice, you have your flock to tend to, and I have mine. Put the clams back. That's a story from South. So I guess in a professional manner, I should tell you to turn your phones off. And the exit in case of fire, nausea, or any other negative things appears to be over there. So I want to just say about these people that are reading, just very short, that these people are real heroes, and the stories they tell are important. And I think, as Peter Cook has said before, if we don't tell these stories, they're going to be lost and they're going to be forgotten. And this is a really important culture that the Portuguese Festival, the Blessing, it's all about celebrating this heritage, and that I'm so grateful to even have a second-hand association with it. So we're going to read. They're going to have our readers in order, and we're going to go according to age. So first we have Yvonne D'Souza, and then we have Rachel White. Then we have Mr. Peter Cook, and then Maria Packett, Mel Joseph, and finally Lisa King. I should also mention that Peter and Mel are members of our writers group, which has been now this is the third year, and they meet regularly along with Russell Sanderson, and share their stories, perfect their stories. But at any rate, Yvonne D'Souza is a published author. I just found out she's Freddie's daughter, and then I'm always learning about the Portuguese. And she's a published author, very, very good writer, and she's going to be our first reader. Yvonne.
Thank you, Dennis. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you to the Festival Committee for continuing to sponsor this event. Festival weekend is one of my favorite weekends, probably the favorite weekend of the year for me, so I'm really excited to be here with you guys. I'm going to read two fairly short pieces. The first is an article I wrote for the festival booklet this year. It's called What I Didn't Know I Knew About My Hometown. Peter and I were heading to Provincetown. We like to get coffee. Latte for me, please. I'm not much of a coffee drinker, but he turned me on to this sweet, fattening concoction that only tastes a little like coffee. At a fancy little coffee shop, no Starbucks anywhere. No Starbucks anywhere in sight, thankfully, and walk around, explore, maybe people watch some. Before meeting me, he had come to town once over 25 years ago for a day trip, but the memory stayed lovely in his heart, for it was the occasion of his daughter's first ice cream cone. 3 years into our relationship then, I had yet to introduce him to the experience of climbing the monument. But this early October day was just right for it, with clear, bright skies and perfectly gentle breeze. You know the kind of day. Not so hot you'll get sweaty on the way up, as the cool stones will help you feel comfortable. We are walkers. He does better on steep hills, while I do better on distance. Side note. You may argue this point, as I am only referencing a birthday trip we took to Newport, Rhode Island, where I was having such a great time exploring another beautiful seaside community that I was still raring to go when he was ready to pass out at dinner time. For this climb, I insisted we trudge up Winslow Street. I told him that as a native, I don't believe the monument climb is complete without hiking up the hill first. Another side note. For the record, we did take the funicular down. The views are also gorgeous, and there's a reason why the word fun is in funicular. As we ascended, between my gasping breaths, I pointed out my old high school and the spot where the cool kids gathered to smoke before class. Side note, not me though. When I started smoking, I always did it far away from school grounds to maintain my good girl reputation. When we got to the very top of Winslow Street, in front of where my favorite Portuguese baker lived, I know Mr. Ferrera worked hard and earned his retirement, but I still miss his fabulous rabanadas. I stopped and commented, "Wow, that walk never gets easier." Peter responded, "Yep, that's a steep one. How come you went up it so fast?" "I was trying to keep up with you." "But I was trying to keep up with you." "What? How is that possible?" Then it clicked. 35 years out of high school, and my brain, my body, and my legs immediately returned to days of being late for school, when getting up the hill as fast as possible was the only way to avoid detention. Once you entered the school, you had to go up one flight of stairs to your locker and another flight to your classroom. I didn't get a lot of detention, so I must have been in decent shape then, despite those Portuguese delicacies. As we ventured up High Pole Hill, I realized how much the memories of my days at PHS were ingrained deep within me. Even as a kid growing up in Provincetown, I knew I was fortunate. So what if we had to drive 30 minutes for pretty much everything but the basics of groceries, hardware, and Cape Cod touristy gifts? It was a whole hour to get to the mall for back-to-school shopping, and don't even get me started on the trek to look for prom dresses. The plus was that in Provincetown, you had less than 10 minutes to your choice of beaches. How many other kids can say that? Side note, if your parents can easily move your June birthday party to a beach playground with no planning, no cost, no foresight, and only one of your big sisters for chaperoning, you may have grown up in Provincetown. I'd watch television reruns of the 70s, and though I loved them, I would look at their surroundings and think, yuck. The Bradys had to go to Hawaii to get any beach time, and even then, they found a bad luck tiki instead of full shells like young town entrepreneurs like me sold for penny candy money. Welcome Back Cotter opened with an ugly, dirty train. No, thank you. I'll take Commercial Street. I knew what I had was unusual, but I didn't quite know how or why. I assumed I would keep my friends from forever, but I didn't know that was partially because our shared unique experience would always be a connection. That's why 4 years later, when I visit St. Peter's or Portuguese Festival event, or even a restaurant in town, there's always someone you want to say hi to, and a conversation starter like no other. It goes beyond, how's your family? In the case of a Provincetown native or a long-term wash ashore, it is more like, how is Aunt so-and-so doing after her operation? Does she miss running the guest house? Have you been in touch with so-and-so? I've been meaning to call him. I have a great story for him. I knew that my hometown was a free one where people could mostly be who they wanted, when they wanted, and they would be welcome. What I didn't know was for the rest of the world, that was not quite so. College and employment outside of Boston were eye-openers, but they challenged me to see different perspectives and reasonings. Always, always, I would return to the values that surrounded me as a child. I knew I loved Provincetown, but I didn't know the joy I would get introducing it to new friends who had never experienced it before. Bay beaches, ocean beaches, the breakwater, the monument, favorite haunts, beach forest that we called beach forest, even though it was more like sand dunes near a very small forest with a great trail running through it. Locations of the best stories, and on and on. Once, when my visiting friends joined me and a local host with an ORV on the back shore, he stopped the truck on a sandy road and asked if anyone wanted something to drink. One city friend looked around and then asked, "Really? Is there a 7-Eleven out here?" He meant he was stopping to open the cooler in the bed of the truck, of course, but wow, we gave her a hard time about that one for quite a while. Peter and these friends find joy in the magic that is Provincetown, both from me, but also from their own sights, sounds, and stories. They appreciate the intimacy of the community as they get to meet residents and recreate their own stories. Another friend loves to tell of the time one local mistook her for another local over me. They try to claim the town as their own, and I smile to myself as I let them. They are just discovering something I was born knowing. This little town can capture your soul and never leave. I knew this. What I didn't know was that this capturing of one's soul, the beauty and enchantment of this charming spit of land, was an offering to everyone, no matter when they made the discovery. I didn't know that when I set out to write a story of coming of age here, that was meant to be a tribute to my first romantic love, it would also naturally be a tribute to my first love ever, my unusual, beautiful, eclectic hometown. Thank you. And just because I've mentioned it, I published a memoir of growing up here in the 80s and coming of age in Provincetown. And I'd just like to read a very brief passage from it because it's relevant to this weekend. In the day, well, I'll just start. Colin and I wound up dating, although it took a couple of attempts on his part and some embarrassing moments on mine to get there. In Provincetown, the last Sunday in June was always dedicated to the blessing of the fishing fleet. The local bishop would come to town, and after Mass, he would bless each vibrantly decorated boat from the staging area at the end of the pier as they sailed past him in glorious procession. After the working boats were blessed, smaller boats came next, and then all settled in the harbor for a long afternoon party. Each boat held a mix of captains, crews, family, friends, and even strangers. Everyone was always welcome. That year, the day fell on a gorgeous blue Sunday, just perfect for the event. Lynn's husband, Michael, took his speedboat out, and Serena, our friend Bob, and I hopped aboard. Though I'd been in their wedding, I didn't know Michael that well. He seemed like a great guy, but reserved. He was usually quiet and did not say much around us. After watching the procession from the water, Michael steered his speedboat around to the fishing vessels so we could say hello to the many people we knew on the many boats we were familiar with. Mostly, I spent the ride yammering on to my girlfriends about my cute neighbors and how the cutest one had brought me fish and how he was so handsome, but I was too wimpy to talk to him. In the distance, I saw the boat Colin fished on, and I told my friends about it. Michael steered towards it, leading me to believe he must know the captain. I wanted to hide. I did not want Colin to know I knew which boat he was on, and I certainly did not want him to see me in a bathing suit. I guess Michael had been listening to me whine about Colin. As we got closer to the boat, he shouted out, "Hey, cute neighbors!" I was horrified. All this time I hung out with him, he hardly said a word, and now he shouted this. "Lynn, what's he doing? Make him stop!" But she didn't. Instead, goaded on by Serena, who had also yelled, "Hey, cute neighbors!" she and Bob joined them. There were 4 people in a little boat motoring around a larger one shouting, "Hey, cute neighbors!" While the 5th person on the boat did her best to crouch down under the wheel and cover herself by pulling the beer cooler in front of her body. Ideally, I wanted to jump off the boat and swim away. But that would mean standing up and showing my full bathing suit body for the 2 seconds it took me to get into the water. It would not be a bad swim. The bay was so calm, we had already seen the local fisherman swim from one boat over 100 yards to the other, all while holding his open beer in his left hand, backstroking with his right, and slowing to sip here and there along the way. We locals had talent for sure. But I knew that if the currents did not allow me to swim back to the pier, it would be an even scarier sight watching Michael and Bob trying to haul me back aboard. So I did my best to disappear until Michael got bored and we headed towards our final destination, Long Point, the place for most of the smaller boat parties that day. Yes. I just wanted to say, if you're interested in the memoir, I do have some copies with me today. They're also available at Women's Craft and Botanica, or all the online channels, and the book is called Shelter of the Monument. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yvonne, and I can say it's a great book. I've read it. I recommend it. And Provincetown does capture your soul, as you say. Our next reader really needs no introduction, Rachel White. If what she delivers here is half as good as what I've heard on the benches in front of Town Hall, it'll be great. You know, we don't have royalty in Provincetown, but if we did, here's the Queen.
He's wonderful. And he also has a great book out. It's a wonderful book, and it's got a lot of names in it, well recognized that you would know, and the history of them. So I give him a little push here. I really didn't write a lot of stuff because I'm ad-libbing. I'm going to go back a little bit, maybe a couple of years, because we were talking about, first of all, I can't even see.
Yeah, use the mic, Rachel.
No, I
Rachel.
kind of reminded us about Azorians and who we were, because we all grew up, we were Portuguese kids. And I'm looking out here because I'm seeing all these wonderful faces of kids that I watched growing up. So we didn't go by age here because I'm older than Jerusalem's gold. Anyway, I was curious to know because we all knew we were Portuguese until one day I said to my friend, she said, "I'm 100% Portuguese." I said, "Yeah, me too." And my mother said, "No, you're not." I said, "What do you mean I'm not?" "Well, your great-grandmother her name was Amita Duché. She was French." I said, "Geez, you even had her name?" I immediately didn't like her. My mother said, "She wasn't born, you weren't born yet when she came. She was a nice lady." Anyhow, so now I began to think about Portuguese people and who we are, where they are, where did all of this interaction happen. So now I began to look up to know about who we were as Portuguese people. So then I learned that there was the Azorians. They were the fishing folk. They were the people who came to fish because that's what they knew. And the mainlanders were wonderful people, but they were farmers, they raised cattle, and they didn't come until later. The reason those fisher folk came here was because they wanted to fish the grounds. They heard that it was rich and wealthy, and they needed to support their families. Well, that wasn't going to work in this town because there were a lot of people that had money invested in the whaling industry. And some of them were bankers and people of wealth. So they formed a Ku Klux Klan back then and decided that these Portuguese people with rubber boots and plaid shirts were not going to come here to clean out their fishing grounds because they needed the fish for whales. Well, they went up to the Catholic Church and they burnt the cross because most Portuguese people were of Catholic faith. And they burnt the cross, and the message was, get out and don't come back. Well, they were courteous for a little bit, so they all left. And then they came back fivefold. And they never went back again because the message was, we're here to stay, and that's who we are. Well, as time went on, then those wonderful people who were here started to rent rooms, and they were able to make some funds to add to what their husbands were making. And that's how they allowed people of all persuasions to come, because they knew what it was like to be adversarial. They knew what it was like to be thrown out of a town that they loved. So they went on, and I'm just going to refer to a couple of notes here, because they did come back. And then my father himself, he was a master mariner, but we didn't have maritime schools. You learn through the ropes, you learn the hard way. But you had to be honored by someone who could vouch for you. And it was Admiral Bowley, who was here at the time, that vouched for my father, so that when the people came from Portugal, their way of fishing was different. And he was able to teach a lot of the fishermen that were here then the rudiments of our way to fish. So some of them became successful captains of their own boats later, and life went on. I'm losing my little place here. Also, as I was looking through who we were and what we were, I found, now that they have testing for this, we all can find out, but that there were some Portuguese that had some Jewish. It wouldn't be Ashkenazi, and it wouldn't be Sephardic, but it would be, it was Sephardic. It wasn't Ashkenazi, and it wasn't, there were other various of Jewish people. They would be the Sephardic group of people, that if there was any Jewish at all. And then back in the 5th century, we are not honored for what we did with some of the Africans. We began to sell our people off. And it was very, and they sold them off to the slave trade. So as a gift to Portugal, the Africans gave Angola to Portugal. And now, of course, there's always people being what they are. There was intermarriage there. So in some cases, that's a little bit of color blood in some of the Portuguese. Not all, but in some. And so, I was going to lower it a little bit.
You can just hold it if you want.
It's okay. Yeah, I'll hold it. Okay, that's even better. Okay, so, I think I'm going to get off that subject, though, because you've got a pretty good idea of who we all are. You know, we're all kind, good people, hardworking people, stay here and continue to work and welcome everybody that comes as our friend. So I'm going to go back to a time when none of you, I don't think, were here during the Depression. And I was. I was young, and it was before the World War II. But when and during the Depression time, it was really poor. We were really poor. There was nothing. There was no food, no anything. Town Hall would open up their basement, and they would give us commodities, flannel nightgowns, flour, sugar, things you couldn't get. And they gave you what looked like a chunk of lard, white lard in a square with a yellow pill. And you had to mix that. And I thought it was fun, but I didn't know too much about that then. It was supposed to be the margarine is what they called it. It was the most god-awful tasting stuff. It was horrible. To this day, I can never stand margarine. I don't care how good they make them. It's margarine. And if you couldn't get butter, then I used jelly, but I wouldn't use that. Anyway, it was the most horrible stuff. And then, as the war was going on, everything that there was went to the war effort. The fishermen couldn't get rubber boots. You couldn't get a lot of things that we needed. And I remember George Bryant, who had to use my red rubber boots because he had none, and we hoofed it every day to school. and he hated them every time he had to wear them. He cried. We had an army base here in Wellfleet. Some of my friends and neighbors who lived here continually after that loved Provincetown so much, including Bill Maynard and Gladys, but he was an army guy over there in the Wellfleet camps. Now, we didn't have the highway. There was 2 streets, Front Street and Back Street, Commercial Street and Bradford Street. That's what they were. So the convoys would come in every week through town with the army back full of soldiers that were going up to bivouac out of Herring Cove, which we called the New Beach. And they did that constantly for training. So that was part of during the war effort. And then we kids, because there was a health problem, there was a problem with ragweed, and it was causing a lot of conditions for people, children especially. So they would pay the kids 10 cents a plant if you would bring to the Board of Health any of the ragweed, so that they were trying to find a way to just get rid of it very soon and quickly. That was one of the things we did besides picking blueberries and selling them for 50 cents so we could go to the carnival and to the movies. The other thing we had constantly, every single week, you would hear whoop, 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 air raid. So now we had to close the shades, put out the lights, and make sure that we were all secure while the people of civil defense would come and check on us to make sure that we were okay. Well, the joke with my mother-in-law was that, I didn't know her then, was that a man who had sort of a look of Asian, and he put the light in the window because she was sitting there knitting and had the light on. And when she looked out, she thought we were invaded by Japanese, so she immediately passed out. That was, and then of course there was always the Dr. Hebert stories. Everybody has to have one Dr. Hebert story. My father died when I was 8, so my mother 24/7 took care of him in the house, and people wait their family there. And they had funeral homes, but not many, and not many people could even afford to do it. So he was waiting in the living room. Dr. Hebert used to come every night. He'd fall asleep. After a while, he'd give himself a little up or a down, and we weren't quite sure what that was. But he was 24/7 working, and they knew he had to keep awake somehow. So he would fall asleep, he'd get up, and he'd leave. Well, one of those times, before the rescue squad, my in-laws started the rescue team and all that. Ronnie wasn't on the team yet. There was 7 years between the 2 boys. So my husband would go, and they didn't have a rescue wagon. So some people would go to the hospital in the hearse. And Dr. Hebert would oftentimes go with his patients. He had access to the hospital. Not all doctors did. You had to be on the staff, so he would accompany his patients to the hospital. And they were in the hearse going 240 up the highway. We didn't have the main highway yet either. It was Route 28. And a cop stopped the hearse. Where are you going in a hurry? Somebody's dead and they're not going anywhere either. Well, Dr. Hebert sat upright and the cop passed out. That is a true story from the early times of our rescue squad. Anyway, you know, these are all old stories that are around for a long time, but you people are younger, so I thought maybe you'd enjoy a little laugh of that one. We could go on and on with all these Provincetown stories, Cape Cod stories, and there's, you know, a ton of them that I could probably recite. You know, I haven't wanted to write a book. The only thing I wrote was proclamations for Marvin Hagel, so much that I was hoping he'd never win another fight. Or proclamations for Jean Poignant, who was going off to see the Queen or something, but those were part of assignments that you have to do whether you wanted to or not. And I think that probably wraps up. There's many more things that have happened during those times. I could probably go on, but if you have any questions, it was tough times. The Second World War went on, and we thought we were a part of it because we're surrounded by water on three sides. We had more U-boats, and we had more submarines and things coming in here all the time. The Air Force didn't come until later because they had an overview after all of these things that were going on here. But we did have, where Keel's makeup is now, was the OSS office. The OSS is the precursor to the CIA, and it was important enough for them to be here, and they were. I got to meet a woman, Nance Stager. She had a wonderful Dalmatian dog, and she was also a female assistant there at the OSS office. But, you know, we survived all of this. There's many stories that happened here through all of that I remember, and thank goodness you kids didn't, but we thought we were actually a part of the Second World War, because there was so much going on through all of that, we lived it, and we had to deal with it, and we survived it, and on life goes. So if you have any questions for anything you want to ask me about that I can answer, I'll be glad to do that. Okay, I think that's
Wow. I think I speak for you all. We could just listen to her for another hour. Wonderful. But catch her on the benches in front of Town Hall. Anyhow, our next speaker also needs no introduction. In fact, he's pretty much the reason we're here. He is the leader of our writers group, and he has a whip, I think Mel told me, usually, or a 2x4, keeps them in order. But we're going to hear now from Peter Cook.
Thank you, Dennis, very much. And thank you all for being here. Rachel's kind of hard for me to follow. I know, we talk about the writers group. Actually, the writers group was created a few years ago by me so that I could learn how to write. Because I went to vocational high school in Provincetown, which was a wonderful place to learn mechanics and welding and all that sort of thing. But it wasn't very good for English. Wasn't so good for teaching me English. So I write in a storytelling fashion, and this is a story I'd love to tell to you right now. First of all, I gotta tell you, I have a special guest, a lot of special guests, but my late son, Joey Cook's son, Chris, came all the way from Minnesota to be here today. And so, I'm very proud. On February 28th of 1945, I was born on a cold wintry night and drew my first breath of Provincetown sea salt air. My father, Joseph Goulat Cook, was born in Provincetown on October 15th in 1908, and he died on August 28th in 1980. Captain George Adams was making 14-day back-to-back offshore fishing trips with a fishing vessel, Barbara Lee, with 3 days in port between. We fished approximately 150 to 200 miles offshore, and this is what happened and how I got the news. I operated the winch on the starboard side. We caught a lot of scallops in every tow. We also caught a lot of big rocks. I tried to pound some of the bigger rocks out of the dredge before hauling it aboard to dump the scallops on deck. Young George, the captain's son and ship's cook, came to me and said, "The captain wants to see you." The first thing I thought of was, I'm going to catch hell for taking too long to get this rake aboard. I finished hauling back and went to see the skipper. I entered the pilot house and Captain George Adams said, "Pedro, your father died. I knew him longer than you did. Most men would stay out here and finish up this trip. But if you want to go in, I'll take you." I answered George and said, if I can make the funeral, I'd like to be there with my family. They'll come from California, Minnesota, and elsewhere. I'd like to be with them. After a long silent pause, George spoke up. "It's going to take a long time to get home from here. Take the wheel. I'll set a course, and I'll go down and tell the boys to clean up the boat. He set a compass course and left me alone with my own thoughts for a couple of hours. When he returned, all he said was, "You can go." He wasn't at all happy about leaving the rich fishing grounds on a broken voyage. Time is money. This was going to be a big expense in fuel cost. Captain Adams was tough and hard as they came, but he was also fair. On that day 45 years ago, he put my family's tragic loss and me ahead of everything else. My thoughts drifted back to the last day I saw my dad. Fishermen have routines. The crew must be on the boat for it to leave the dock. My routine as engineer had me on the boat 1 hour before departure time to make ready. I lived upstairs in our family home and Dad lived downstairs. I always stopped in to see him before going out on 14-day trips. Usually he'd be sitting in his chair in the living room. The last time I saw him was the day I left on this trip. I stopped in to see him. He stood looking out the front door with his eyes fixed on the water, the harbor. We spoke for a while. My wife Tanya came in to ask if I was ready. She would drive me down to the boat. I didn't want to leave. I stretched out our visit as long as I could before saying, "Dad, I have to go." My father reached out and shook my hand. He said, "I love you." I wasn't used to hearing that from him. That event and that day wasn't our routine. To my knowledge, he hadn't been sick. He looked good, but an uneasiness settled over me. On my way to the wharf, I said, "Tanya, if anything happens to my dad, please do your very best to get a hold of me." The fishing vessel Barbara Lee departed for George's Banks. I don't remember how many days we were at sea when the dad got the news. Surely I have it in my logbooks. Captain Adams never kept the ship's radio on. He didn't let anyone know where he was fishing. As fate would have it, Kenny Silver, the owner of the Barbara Lee, also owned another boat named the Gerda Reba. He had a good idea where Captain George would be fishing. Kenny sent the Gerda Reba in our direction with orders to flash the lights on and off as soon as they saw our vessel. George spotted the lights and turned the radio on, and that's how he knew my dad had died. It was a long steam home. We arrived in Provincetown pre-dawn on the day of the funeral. Waiting for me on the wharf were my wife Tanya, my brother Joe, and sisters Irene and Gracie. All these years later, I remember things my father told me. I can almost hear his voice. "I'm going to tell you something, my boy. If you're going to go to sea, don't ever let that boat leave the dock without you being on it." I made my father's funeral, but because of his words to me, I was on the Barbara Lee the very next day, headed back to the fishing grounds to finish up where we left off. Throughout my life, I worked ashore as a mechanic. Many times I said, "Dad, I want to go fishing." He would say, "Fishing? A man doesn't go fishing because he wants to go fishing. He goes fishing because he has to go fishing." Even as a grown man, I knew for sure I would never go to sea without my father's blessings. His words to me were, if you go to work on a boat, there are a few things you need to know. You're going to get sick at times. There's no shame in getting sick out there, but don't ever stop working. If you have to throw up over the rail. Don't ever leave the deck and go lay in the bunk. Make sure you buy your boots 2 sizes too big, because if you go overboard, you can kick them off. They won't fill up with water and suck you down. Don't ever quit at sea. If you don't like it, you keep working until the end of the trip. Never argue with the captain. You go to the captain at the end of the trip and say, "Thanks for taking me out, Captain. It's not for me. I'm going to take my gear and get through, but maybe I'll try it some other time." Don't ever leave a boat on bad terms. All the skippers talk on the radio, and they may be talking about you. Besides that, you may have to go back on the same fishing boat you left. You want the captains talking good about you. My father was a good man. He was only 15 years old when his father passed away. At that time, his mother told him he needed to go to work full-time at a full-time job at Perry's Market, down on Commercial Street. This is interesting. His father, Manuel de Farias, was born on the Portuguese Azorian island of San Miguel in March of 1856. Manuel was a commercial fisherman who migrated to Provincetown, like so many Portuguese fishermen before him. He took a job on a whaling ship, working to pay his passage. Manuel's brother, Francisco de Farias, also a fisherman, had already made his way to America on a whaling ship. Francisco settled in Provincetown and changed his name to Frank Cook. He was a dory fisherman. Some of you old-timers may remember a postcard picture of Frank Cook standing next to a 270-pound halibut he caught off Wood End. He was a dory fisherman and caught the huge fish on a hand line. He was my grandfather's brother Frank. As soon as my grandfather arrived in Provincetown, he changed his own name to Manuel Cook. The Cook family, not our Cook family, were a prominent and influential whaling family in Provincetown throughout the 19th century. The dynasty spanned over 4 generations, building significant fortunes in the whale trade. They owned multiple properties and businesses related to the industry. Many Portuguese men worked on whaling ships. They gained passage from the Azores to Provincetown. Between 1820 and 1920, over 160 whaling vessels sailed from Provincetown, making over 900 voyages. It was routine for whaling ships to sail to and from the Azorian Islands. Imagine them ships. San Miguel, Pico, Fayal were the most prominent islands for whaling during the industry's peak. Numerous whaling factories and communities on those islands were deeply dedicated to the industry. This all provided an opportunity for Portuguese fishermen and their families to reach America. By 1895, a quarter of Provincetown's population was Portuguese. As I've mentioned, my father and I were born in Provincetown. My sons Peter and Michael and our grandchildren Tommy and Irene were born at Cape Cod Hospital, but they have Provincetown. We are a multi-generational Provincetown family. We are a family of Portuguese heritage. My father and his brother were born into the life of multi-generational fishermen in the Azores. When my father went to work at Perry's Market at 15 years old, he first learned the fruit and produce business. Soon he was delivering fruit and produce around town from a horse-drawn wagon. Finally, he became a master meat cutter. He chose the fishing life when fishing was lucrative, and he earned enough money to put a down payment on his 21 Mechanic Street home. He bought that in 1945, the year I was born. I'm in it today still. When my time came, I gave up working a steady job and got on a boat. It was my choice to go fishing. I could never understand being born in Provincetown with so many fishing boats going out to sea and me never experiencing that life. I remember my dad saying, I'm going to tell you something else about fisherman's life. You always think you're going to get rich, but you never ever do. And sometimes you think you're going to starve, but you never ever do. The fisherman's life is a life like many others of getting by. I listened to my father, and he was always right. In my early childhood, my daily routine was work. My chores included emptying the ice melt water from under the icebox before it overflowed, taking kerosene cans outside to fill them from a drum, to keep the kitchen and living room stoves going and running through the night. My father taught me how to take the stove burners all apart and clean the carbon out and replace the wicks. My fun was to go to my friend's house to watch their black and white TV. We didn't have a TV or a telephone, but I had a good life. My parents were like your parents, hard-working people, dedicated, making the best life possible they could for their children. It's now Provincetown Portuguese Festival, Blessing of the Fleet 2025. Provincetown today isn't the Provincetown we all grew up in. There's a special Portuguese word with a profound meaning. The word is spelled S-A-U-D-A-D-E, and it's pronounced saudades. For all that grew up here, saudades is our feeling of missing home. Even we natives still living in Provincetown miss our home. We miss our fishing village. With parents, grandparents, grandchildren, friends, family, we miss our once was life. In 2023, while at St. Peter's Cemetery tidying up the Cook family lot, where my grandfather and grandmother, mom and dad, as well as many aunts and uncles now rest, I looked down at my own name on my marker stone. At that moment, I decided to go to a faraway place I had never been, the Azores. The island of San Miguel was calling me, the once was home of my grandparents. In 2023, Tanya and I visited San Miguel Island. It was our first time. For me, it was a journey far back in time. Long ago on San Miguel Island, an infant was born. Unable to care for her little child, a forlorn mother left her at a big, beautiful Catholic church with the name of San Sebastian. The baby in my lifetime would become my grandmother. She was baptized by the church sexton, Antonio Deluxe, of Violente Augusta Gabriel. They became the infant's godparents and gave her the name Violenta Augusta. The child perhaps spent her early days in the church convent or orphanage. She reached 15 or 16 years old while living on San Miguel Island. Under a prearranged agreement, she was tasked with caring for Manuel de Perez Cook's children in Provincetown. Manuel's first wife, Maria de Gloria Pereira, died in Provincetown of typhoid fever, August 7, 1921, leaving Manuel Cook alone with 3 young daughters from their marriage. In February of 1891, Violenta made a passage to America, possibly on the cargo ship SS Olinda. It was a popular ship for crossings at that time. On some of her legal papers, she used the name Violenta Augusta Carazal, which in Portuguese means heart. Violenta filled her task. Upon arriving in Provincetown, she took care of Manuel's children. I vaguely remember my father telling me his mother lived on School Street in the neighborhood before she married his father, Manuel Cook. Manuel and Violenta had 9 children together of their own. For a little infant girl left in a church in the Azores, she lived a long life in Provincetown and inherited a lot of names. Violenta Augusta Carazal Ferreira Cook was my grandma Cook. She was Bo Cook to the family. She was Viola Cook to the townspeople. She died in Provincetown at 85 years old. Tanya and I fell in love with San Miguel Island. For me, it was a blessing to be inside the Church of San Sebastian, to pray where my infant grandmother was christened. We visited the convent and explored the island. I spent time at the waterfront speaking with the local fishermen and thinking of my grandfather that I never knew. I'm almost done. A little bit. And I'm dry as a bone. Tanya and I returned to San Miguel the next year in 2024 and have another trip booked to go again in 2025. My life is a time machine. I go ahead through the days, yet back through the years. My heart is divided between San Miguel and Provincetown. Special thank yous are in order today for the following people. Carol Duke for carrying on this tradition of sharing our stories. Nancy Silva for putting the Portuguese Festival book together every year, even though my story's not in the book this year. Thanks to the Portugal Festival Committee and every fisherman that works on the sea. Thank you to my son Peter, our videographer today. And this story is dedicated to my dear cousin Geneva Cook, who generously shared her extensive family genealogy research and love of family with me, making this story possible. And thanks to everyone in our audience for being here today. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you, Peter. It's another one I could listen to for another hour. Lots of good stuff there. You're not going to get it anywhere else. No, thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Maria Packett is our next reader, and I remember last year she was terrific, so I'm looking forward to hearing her again.
There's something about going home that recharges the spirit and heals the heart in a way that few other things can. This weekend, I introduced Todd, my husband, to the majesty of my childhood and showed him the magical places where wind, water, and sunshine join forces to author my life story. We walked the streets where I worked and played and loved, and he never once grew impatient with me as I pointed out homes of people he didn't know and told him stories of stores and restaurants that no longer exist. We ate our fill of kale soup and feasted on the salty goodness of oysters and little necks, shellfish and ocean nectar so fresh it was like kissing Neptune himself. Unable to resist the sense of the luring passers-by into the Portuguese bakery, we succumbed and selected 2 creme brulees, probably not Portuguese, but from the multitude of offerings. Later that night, we savored our dessert in a dimly lit gazebo while gazing up at the monument, looking for Donald Duck. I got up early and took a walk down the wharf, allowing the sounds, smells, and sights of my youth to nourish my spirit and cleanse my soul. The 48 hours ended perfectly with early morning coffee, deep conversation, laughter, and tears with someone whose childhood was so intertwined with my own that we are more like brothers and sisters than friends and neighbors. As we passed the sand dunes on our way out of town, I made a quiet promise to myself to make this a yearly pilgrimage. So that was really about our the first time we came to Provincetown for Portuguese Festival, Portuguese weekend. And this is about last year. I kind of make it a habit to journal these things when I come home from this because I want it to remain in my spirit. We once again ventured to Provincetown for the annual Portuguese Festival. I don't know if my husband loves it as much as I do, or if he simply tolerates it because he knows how much it means to me. I hope for the former, and if not, I'm grateful for the latter. Last night at dinner, we tried to figure out how long we've been doing this. We couldn't come up with a year. We started the tradition and resorted to recalling the places we stayed and how often. There were 3 or 4 years at the Secret Garden when Michael owned it, then 2 or 3 more when Chip and his partner, whose name I don't recall. In my mind, it's always Dale, thanks to the dancers and the chipmunks. I know it's not accurate, but I use it as a placeholder and apologize in my mind for my fading memory. After that, we spent 2 years at Ari House when the Secret Garden sold and became a private residence. It wasn't as centrally located, but there were beautiful flowers and a beehive in the front yard. Each morning, I greeted the day with a cup of tea on the deck, enjoying the view of the harbor as the fishermen and honeybees headed out to work. I didn't get around to making reservations this year until late spring, and Ari House was sold out, so we're at a new-to-us place, the Somerset Inn. It's an easy walk to town, just far enough for the center to avoid the crowds and the noise. Though our back-of-a-napkin math failed to resolve the question at hand, it provided interesting dinner conversation and once again proved that my husband has a far better memory than I do. As it typically does, my bladder nudged me awake at god-awful o'clock. I opened my eyes enough to recall that I wasn't at home and took a perfunctory second to orient myself. This week, I retired from a job that I've held for 38 years. I may have turned in my keys and submitted my letter of departure, but my circadian rhythms had yet to adjust. To be fair, it's only been 2 days, and so it's probably an unreasonable expectation for my body to remember what it's like to sleep in. I knew that trying to get back to sleep was an exercise in futility, so I didn't bother to go back to bed. Instead, I traded my pajamas for the sundress I had worn the day before and walked down the alley across the street to the beach to watch sunrise. Instinctually, I took off my flip-flops and tossed them into the sand. I dipped my toes in the water and silently scolded myself for how long it had been since my feet were in the harbor. My mind instantly flooded with childhood memories of swimming lessons at the boat slip. I noted the lack of seaweed and chuckled at how terrified we were of it as children. The water was warm, and I regretted not bringing a bathing suit. Yesterday, while packing, I thought about it, but opted not to since it was unlikely we would go swimming. I was no longer afraid of eelgrass and kelp. Fair skin, cold ocean temps, and sharks now fuel my hesitancy. I contemplated shedding my dress and diving in, but I wasn't bold enough to do so, despite the early morning hours. Instead, I waded further into the water and awaited the sunrise. Minutes later, a telltale sliver of fire began appearing on the horizon, washing the vista with an ever-shifting palette of colors. Its arrival marked both the literal and metaphorical dawning of a new day, as I prepared myself to commence a new season of life. Provincetown pavement and beach sand had provided the brick and mortar of my childhood, supporting me and protecting me as I evolved into the person I am today. I allowed this foundation to support me once again as I stood there simultaneously looking forward and gazing back. The salt water seeped through my skin, nourishing the cells of my being. I released frustrations and regrets and dismissed thoughts that no longer served me. I forgave myself for mistakes and foolish choices. I promised to prioritize family and friends and pursue passions I had hit pause on for far too long. I committed to taking better care of myself instead of continuously sacrificing my well-being at the altar of busyness and achievement. The sun was now fully visible and the tide was receding. I folded my hands to my chest and whispered a prayer of gratitude to the universe, to everyone and everything who brought me to this sacred moment. And then I made one final vow to come home more often, and next time I'll bring a bathing suit.
That is such beautiful writing, and I like the fishermen and the honeybees heading off to work. That's a nice image. Beautiful, beautiful work. Next up is Mel Joseph, who I met a couple of years ago, and he's taught me a lot about Provincetown, and many of you know him as Molly's boy. And I can't wait to hear. He has authenticity in every sentence that he writes. So come on up, Mel.
I'm going to read two things today because there's plenty of time. I'm going to start with the edge of danger. And this was a prompt that we did at our writers group. So this is quite original. In 1957, my mother walked Jimmy Delpy and me to our first day of elementary school at Veterans Memorial. We walked in lockstep, with us up Watson's Court, down Cudworth, across Prince Street, and on to the back corner of the Grace Hall parking lot. Here, she stepped away and left me to navigate this brand new adventure with my partner in crime, Jimmy. This was the type of moment I would encounter and refer to as the edge of danger. It would take some years to really feel comfortable passing through this imaginary zone. Our immediate future would include playground games of dodgeball, kids being pelted with red rubber balls hurled by enemy classmates, girls chanting, and feel free to join in, Miss Susie had a tugboat, the tugboat had a bell, Miss Susie went to heaven, the tugboat went to. Or the boys ranting, 369, the goose drank wine, the monkey chewed tobacco on the streetcar line, the line broke, the monkey got choked, they all went to heaven in a little rowboat. Swinging like that monkey on the bars and the rough and tumble game of bulldog, these playground pleasures would sadly end with a single file orderly march to the land of paralyzing question and answer sessions. Don't make eye contact with the teacher and they may not call on you. And you could avoid the deliverance of a humiliating wrong answer and the following giggles of your classmates. Find your desk, place your pencil box in it with a number 2 pencil and a pink gum eraser, Bic ballpoint pen, ruler, and safety scissors. Following the Lord's Prayer and Pledge of Allegiance, hand placed proudly over my heart, school is now in session. Miss Francis comments on the back of my first grade report card, and yes, I have every one of them, and my daughters swear I never should have graduated. would include, Melvin has not put forth his best effort this term. And later, Melvin's attitude towards his schoolwork has greatly improved. I was a 6-year-old. I couldn't sort out this type of double talk. I wished to get back to the playground stuff of pulling Patty Crave's pigtails, catching flies that landed on my desk with a swift swipe of an open hand, and putting them in the glass inkwell recessed at the head of my desk. These, for sure, being meaningful endeavors which would benefit me later in life. Those rainy day recesses were owned by Milton Bradley, taking me to the head of the class, into the castle on top of Candyland. Parker Brothers taught us strategy, diplomacy, conflict, and conquest by taking risks. Shooting cards against the wall, skilled placement won you a favorite baseball hero, and a gloat as the vanquished slithered away with their head down. Second grade teacher, Mrs. Sylvia, confounded me with, he's a quiet pupil and sometimes very nervous. Holy crap, was I neurotic and in need of psychiatric analysis? Okay, yes, I did chew my nails to the nub in these moments of classroom anxiety. Between these classroom landmines, it was easier navigating the hallways under the watchful eye of janitors Jimmy Sants and Ray Zawalik, while on the way to the lunchroom, there to enjoy a fine cuisine of meat-covered mashed potatoes, buttered green beans, hot buttered homemade rolls, dessert, and milk, served lovingly by our Aunt Fanny. Jimmy and Ray's smiling faces and pats on the head were needed confirmations that even though my mother no longer walked me past the edge of danger, there were caring eyes beyond the teachers that kept encouraging me to walk through the field of education confidently. Though still laden with potential landmines, their smiling support was given freely between the swiping of their 36-inch deluxe dust mops. Fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Collinson, wrote that I was self-conscious in the first term, but was no longer self-conscious in the second term. But there can be no credibility for her evaluation, since she also stated Melvin is especially good in art. Melvin could not then and cannot now draw a recognizable stick figure. Reading some more always came up across all grades. Heck, to this day I still don't pick up a book to read with any regularity, and I'm a guy, so I don't even read instructions needed to assemble them. Now, my third grade teacher told my mother that I was impish. These are all things that are on the back of my real report cards. Finally, something I could embrace. In using my own scale, I give myself an A+, Webster's definition. Inclined to do slightly naughty things for fun and mischief. That's what school was all about. It was a rude awakening to get Mr. Chambers as a 6th grade teacher, being that it was the first male force passing judgment on my learning abilities. He did not disappoint. Melvin has not put forth his best effort in school this term. Followed by the old nemesis, Melvin needs to do more outside reading. I promise to spend more time in the comic book land of Spider-Man and Superman and reading the back of the cereal box as I shovel my Captain Crunch into my hungry mouth. Along the journey through the 6th grades, I received no accolades or safety certificates, citizenship, or art awards, nor was I awarded an atlas for excellence in scholarship. I was never asked to make a welcoming speech at a student assembly, and by no means qualified to write and give a speech as the class prophecy. In the words of 3rd grade teacher, Mrs. Nickerson, his work is satisfactory, and with a little more effort, he could do better. Oh well, our June 1963 6th grade graduation night would be here soon, and dancing to Twist and Shout and Mickey's Monkey and Pipeline. And I walked out of the halls of Veterans Memorial School with my certificate, stating I had satisfactorily completed the course of study prescribed by the Veterans Memorial School Committee. Now, I do still have that document, actually. Now it's on to 7th grade and the dangerous halls of PHS. You spend 6 years climbing the ladder of respect in elementary school, only to step into the next educational battlefield on the bottom rung. From Red Rover to Mary Had a Little Lamb, flashcards to reading circles, All we have at the end are these stories to leave behind. Thank you. In a lot of my remembrances, I refer to nooks and crannies of Provincetown that hold my past memories. It's in these tucked away places, spiritual and physical, that I am able to remain connected to the uniqueness of growing up in this small town in the 50s and 60s, in spite of today's burgeoning changes. The sidewalks downtown today have been replaced, and the aging unevenness smoothed out. I may walk sure-footed today over these pavements, but I see the old rolling waves of decades-old brick navigated by our youthful and nimble feet. Whether sitting on the park benches or navigating these sidewalks in and out of Adams Pharmacy, my DNA cannot be covered up by pristine pavements. When we walk downtown on our way to school or after school, a sighting of the harbor would always be on the menu through one or more alleyways between businesses and homes. Small alleyways cradled all of us in our youth. For me, the Watson's Court alleyway was teeming with my friend Jimmy's calls of hum baby, throw it by me, throw it by me. A game of pitcher and catcher with my high leg kick imitation of the Giants' Juan Marichal on display. I know that the whack of the ball into an old leather catcher's mitt still resonates in the ancient trees. Young impressionable boys, unable to sort out truth from gossip, craning our necks to catch a glimpse of the town pump, making her way through the neighborhood, our youthful imaginations out of control. One of Jimmy Roderick's cesspool monkeys, donning his gear and climbing down a ladder into the stinky abyss of the Steele's rental apartment cesspool. As time passed, he didn't appear. My curiosity drew me closer in for a look, and I was joltingly surprised as he popped out of the darkness, comfortably wearing the stuff that could only be referred to as Madre o Cogliones. It takes all kinds would be the retort. Staying on the scary refuge track, the outhouses at both my Grampies on West Vine and the one at Vavaz on Fishburne Court topped the list. A young boy's fear that his bony, skinny ass might just drop right in and his cries for help to never be heard. My Grampy's house on West Vine Street had no indoor bathroom. Under the stairway to the second floor was a small door. The door opened, the stink of the porcelain chamber pot filled your nose. Pull the string chain to turn on a naked light bulb. Sit, do your duty, and upon exit, one of my twin aunts, the Neekeds, would take the filled pot out to the back deck and later on the way, all the way to the two-holer in the backyard to empty. This was a nook that made my young cranium crazy. Every corner of the aisles of Marta's Five and Dime held a dream. A Duncan yo-yo, a balsa wood airplane, a bag of army men, a cap gun and a roll of caps, a squirt gun, a weapon of mischief, or a box kite that was just waiting to get caught in a power line or a tree, tears to follow. Penny candy stores taking our copper for beer barrels and bullseyes, Liquor-Maid and Mary Jane's. Trouble, always only a brain fart away, getting tarred up, playing around the nets hanging out to dry on the low bushes behind the Yale Forest. Or a gaggle of Benangus cousins getting totally sooty from the coal bin in my Favaw's backyard, denying that we weren't where we were not permitted, given away by our raccoon eyes and blackened snot. Spinning on a stool at Adam's counter, awaiting a vanilla or cherry coke, with money in hand, perusing the fragrance counter on the east wall. The size of the perfume bottle for a Mother's Day gift is more important than how it smells. The well-worn floor planking at Joe Marshall's and shouldering the Wonder Bread screen door push bar with one arm and a Hoodsie ice cream push-up in the other hand. There was an 8-foot basket on a small parking spot next to the A house on the Masonic Place. It was where us stumpy Portuguese could go to dunk a basketball. I can stare out at the old Lancey's Wharf remains today and see the old net shed on the end, a secret hideaway of a boy and a high school sweetheart, awkwardly navigating the mountains of teen love. Hands slapped away as they crept. A young Mark Silver accompanied me to the Gosnell Street phone booth to call the sweetheart in an attempt to deceive her mother that it wasn't me that was ultimately calling her daughter. There now is a house on Prince Street that displays the family name above the front door. The stoop was where I pointed up to an August night sky and taught a young girl how to find the big and the little dipper. Innocence lives in the nooks and the crannies of a teen head nestled on a shoulder. Watson's Court intersects Cudworth and leads to the daily trek to Veterans Memorial School. Bullies stood guard at the Prince Street intersection with intimidating poses. Coming-of-age troubles needed to be navigated. Life has its landmines, but if you know that someone would always be looking out for you if things went wrong. The end of school and the anticipation of summer girls to town brought boys to let their eyes wander and loyalties to fray. An infinite number of invalid excuses to let down your high school sweetheart were feeble at best. Yet, come the day after Labor Day, local love would be on sale again at the Adams Pharmacy counter. My Papa and Papa's 8 Fishburne Courts nooks and crannies fill my heart. They were a family living a hard-scrabble life. Open the door to the kitchen and a high chair sits nestled under the black wall phone, awaiting the diapered bum of the newest grandchild. No love was ever at loss around the kitchen table, or a handmade Christian saying, "God bless our home," hung. Every Menangus first cousin anxiously wanted to be old enough to get the promotion from the kids' table to a spot below the plaque. It is now proudly in the ownership of my second cousin, Sarah. A pot of baked beans in the oven, soon to be married to rings of linguiça. A silky bread pudding, apples and raisins, adding a unique texture, a recipe my Papa took with her when she passed. My Papa patiently working his fillet knife over a whetstone. One day you'd be old enough for him to impart his filleting skill to you. Menangus little rascals lining up on the rails at Duart's, dancing our way to Prose. Mary Ethel, the queen of balance, always leading the way, and the first to hop the fence into the backyard adjacent to Uncle Put's shed. A rock on the east corner of my Papa's house was a designated staging place for all family photos. In diapers, out of diapers, in the arms of older cousins. Seemed that if any kid stood or sat on the rock, the crowd gathered and a camera broke out. Smiling, laughing, and crying always overruled, "Say cheese." There was always a no juiz in the cabeça, a cala boca garan, ois cadez, and a pouco tadinha. Portuguese was spoken in the house for the benefit of my mostly deaf Papa. It was easier for her to read the lips of her native language. Now all us kids had to do was tug on her apron and get her attention and say, "Cookie." And her love always produced a confection for our sweet tooths. Summer friends from multiple generations were welcomed by the Portuguese family at 8 Fishburne Court. There was Laura Lollipop and Kiki Shallow, girlfriends of the Menangus girls since the 20s and 30s. Murray and Louise from Shalom Shop. The devout Catholics and the loving Jewish summer visitors intertwined their lives with no prejudices. Later, into our baby boomer generation, the vast family of those Jewish friends brought their sons and daughters and cousins and friends into the Menangus household. There was Butch Mulaney and Butch Rizal, Phil Castellano, to turn the heads of the first cousin girls. Sammy and Eric Shalom, still considered friends. At summer of '64, when Eric introduced me to his cousin Linda, and it led to my first kiss at the edge of the dunes while picking beach balls. Though we were only 13, she was Brooklyn streetwise, and I was only a boy from a small town on the long arm of Cape Cod. Out to Marta Field for a game against the Screen in summer, or a morning league Friday. Steve Correa opened the shed full of sports gear and trusted us all to a morning of unsupervised chaos. Though he did make his boundaries, we learned about consequences. A fall football rally in the high school parking lot, or how the PHS cheerleaders look so good in orange and black. Cool girls hanging butts out of their mouths at Walkers before and after school. Class rings hanging around sweethearts' necks. proof of ownership. The DNA of our teen hormones ran amok in every nook and cranny. A hot summer afternoon, standing in the dark on the west wall of Ant's bowling alley, pumping quarters into the pinball machines, putting every ounce of my life into ringing the bells. The coins run out, and it's time to go dive for more. Delivering groceries from Nelson's Market to the boats, tied up on the wharf. My first sight of nudies, posted on the door to the galley, and magazines tucked discreetly in a bunk for quick viewing. Fringe benefits needing no additional rewards. And we've all heard the saying, you can't go home again. That is true when you want to go back to find Tarzan's Valley or the initial street, where you carved your sweetheart's allegiance to your high school sweetheart, and in some cases, carved it to more than one town girl. And maybe a summer love as well on the opposite side of the tree. I'll always keep reliving these moments that live in these nooks and crannies. I've gone down the wharf recently and searched out for my Uncle Tony, looking for a mess of heads, but he and the cod cast-offs are nowhere to be found. Matter of fact, I can't see the Jimmy Boy, nor the Captain Bill, or Reneva, but I will always hear the diesel engines on idle and the sounds of circling gulls and an early morning foghorn. Thank you.
Taught me so much about Provincetown history, and she will forget more history of Provincetown than I will ever know. And she's also the curator of so many artifacts and photographs, and we all owe her a great, great debt for saving so much Provincetown history. So now we're going to hear from Lisa. Come on up.
Hi, everyone. I'm not going to talk about my memories. My interest goes back hundreds of years. So I'm going to tell you a story that happened in Provincetown in the year 1800. The names are correct in this story, but I wrote about it, but I kept, I wanted the names to be the same. So, this is... Is that good? Kind of, can you hear me okay? All right. This is called the Bay of Chaleur Blessing. The Bay of Chaleur makes a natural southern border on Quebec and a northern border on New Brunswick. It goes right between there. It's a really big bay. So, this is my retelling of an event which took place in Provincetown in the year 1800. In the hours before dawn, it's going to be a part of the book that I'm putting together. I just took an excerpt from it to read here. In the hours before dawn, on a brisk spring morning, the fishing village slept wrapped in a blanket of silence, awaiting the long call of the seagulls to herald in the new day. The peace was broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the ship hulls at anchor in Provincetown Harbor. Young Jock Ryder sat up in his bed as he was shaken awake by his uncle, the chill early morning air enveloping him. His body trembled with cold and his breath formed small clouds as he fumbled for his clothes in the darkness. It was his first time going to sea, a momentous occasion in a young boy's life and a proud moment for the family. Jock pulled on the woolen stockings his grandmother had downed for him countless times. The hand-me-down boots from his older cousins swallowed up his feet. At 10 years, Jock was finally deemed old enough to join his uncle, Captain Peter Ryder, aboard the schooner Polly. On her mooring, the Polly bobbed impatiently, her masts reaching towards the star-flecking Dago's sky as the men loaded the ship. Captain Ryder stood on the deck, his eyes watching the men as they made their way aboard for the long journey north to the cod-rich waters of the Bay of Chaleur. The crew of the Polly was a motley collection of fishermen. There was Ben Smith, broad as a barn door and twice as strong. He used to hoist barrels onto his shoulder like they were feather pillows. George Barnes worked alongside Tom Olson, called the Swede, while Bob Atwood, the ship's cook, secured the provisions and practiced efficiency. Nick Adams and the Larkin brothers completed the crew. The men's faces were slowly becoming weathered from bearing the salt spray marks of so many voyages on the water. As dawn painted the eastern sky shades of orange, pink, and gold, the Polly hoisted her anchor. The winds filled her sails, carrying her by Long Point and then Wood End before heading north toward the fertile fishing grounds of Canada. But Jot's excitement quickly turned to misery as they passed Race Point and headed north. The roll of the schooner's deck sent the greenhorn's stomach lurching. He spent the first day on his knees at the rail, much to the amusement of the seasoned crew. After the boy paid his dues to Neptune over the gunwale, he slowly found his sea legs and went to work on the boat beside his shipmates. By the end of the week, young Jot was earning his keep as a cabin boy, tending to whatever the captain needed and helping Bob prepare meals in the galley. Sometimes he could be found scrambling up the rigging like he had been born to it, as he adapted to the rhythm of the water. At night, he was lulled to sleep by the sway of his hammock and found that he loved this salty life. On first seeing it, Jot was dumbstruck by how large the Bay of Chaleur was. Day after day, they hauled in cod until their salt was depleted. The barrels were full and the ship's hull sat a bit lower in the water. I stapled it wrong. The weather held fair, with gentle breezes and calm seas, a fisherman's dream after weeks of hard work covered in slime and brine, with constant exposure to the elements. On a Sunday morning, Captain Ryder called his crew to breakfast. A fair wind was blowing as the rising sun painted the waters of the bay in shades of silver, blue, green, and gold. As everyone took a seat, he announced, "Our hold's full and our salt's spent. Time to point the Polly towards home, boys." Cheers erupted around the galley. It had been a profitable voyage, and every man aboard was eager to see his loved ones, spend their hard-earned shares and stand on solid ground again. The Polly was sailing east towards the Gulf of St. Lawrence, as the men on deck cleaned, salted, and stored the last of the catch. The captain was at the tiller, and young Jot stood at the bow, watching the hull cut through the water as she gracefully guided along. The air was cold for early spring, Jot thought, as he wrapped his wool coat tighter about himself. The only sounds that could be heard were the gentle creak of the ship's rigging and the distant cry of birds. But then, carried on the morning breeze, came something else, something that made Jot's blood run cold. "Uncle Peter," the boy cried urgently. Captain Ryder hurried to the gunwale, followed by the rest of the crew. They strained their ears, listening intently for something out of place over the natural sounds of the sea and ship. Excuse me. Hold on. There, Jot pointed toward a barely visible rock jutting out from the water, surrounded by circling gulls. The men felt silent, and then it came again, unmistakable and heartbreaking, carrying across the water like a prayer on the wind. "Sweet Mother of God," George Barnes whispered in disbelief. "That sounds like a baby crying." Captain Ryder's face hardened with determination. "Nick, George, take young Jot in the dory and find out what in blazes is going on that rock." The small boat cut through the water, each pull on the oars bringing them closer to the hauntingly pitiful sound. As they approached the small rocky outcropping, Jot could see it was barely large enough for a person to sit on. The rising tide had reached its edges. "Careful now," Nick warned. "That rock's dangerous." But the boy was already moving, his heart pounding as he landed on the narrow edge. What he saw there would haunt his dreams for years to come and fill his heart with joy for a lifetime. A tiny child lay on her back, pale and weak from exposure, on the small outcropping where she had been abandoned. The baby couldn't have been more than 2 months old, and the thin, soaked rag she wore clung to her body. The flow of the incoming tide was already lapping at the poor child's feet, yet somehow she had survived whatever ordeal had brought her to this desolate rock in the middle of the Bay of Chaleur. Who could do such a thing? Jot whispered, his voice breaking as he reached down and gently lifted the child. The baby was so light, so fragile, yet she clung to life with fierce determination. Wrapping her in his wool cloak, he held her close, He held her close, feeling her tiny heartbeat against his chest. The short trip back to the Polly seemed to take forever. Finally, the dory pulled alongside the ship, and Captain Ryder took the precious bundle from Jot, cradling her in his arms before handing her to the cook. Bob, strip away these wet things and get her warm and fed down in the galley. We ain't very handy or well fixed for girl babies aboard the Polly, but by hooky, we're a sight more human than the devils that left that tot on the rock to die, Captain Ryder said. That's actually a quote. As the cook worked to make the child comfortable, wrapping her in warm blankets and settling her in a bunk to sleep, young Jot stood on deck looking back toward the rock. As the schooner's sails caught the wind, he watched the rock disappear between the rising tide, marked only by a swirl on the surface of the water. Divine intervention, Captain Ryder said, he whispered, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the boulder had rested moments before. Sheer luck we caught her cry in the wind. Another 5 minutes and she'd have been a goner. During the journey home, the crew took turns caring for their unexpected passenger. They named her Ruth, and she seemed to thrive under their rough but tender ministrations. Bob Atwood fashioned a makeshift bottle from materials in his galley, while Ben Smith carved small toys from wood. The gruff Larkin brothers could be found making silly faces to coax smiles from the sweet child. Nick Adams and George Barnes weren't immune to her charms either. As the Polly rounded Long Point, their excitement peaked as they saw their loved ones along the shore waiting for them. The schooner's anchor was dropped and the sails left unfurled to dry in the sun. The Larkin brothers rowed the captain into low water, where he stepped out of the dory and carried Ruth ashore with infinite care, placing her in the waiting arms of his mother, old Granny Ryder. The elderly woman's eyes filled with tears as she brushed her weathered cheek against the baby's soft skin and kissed her forehead. "Welcome home, little one," she whispered. "Welcome home." The story of the abandoned waif spread like wildfire, becoming the talk of every kitchen and tavern. The forsaken child found on the rock in the middle of the Bay of Chaleur was adopted by the Ryder family soon after. They felt she was a blessing that had come to them on the tide. Years passed and Ruth grew into a fine young woman, under Granny Ryder's loving care. When Captain Peter retired and turned the Polly over to his nephew, Jot took command with the confidence of a man who had learned seamanship from one of the best. But every departure was agony for both Ruth and Jot. The boy who had saved her life had grown into the man who held her heart, and she had become the woman who made his world complete. Captain Jot Ryder and Ruth were joined in holy matrimony in Granny Ryder's garden, surrounded by the fishing community that had embraced Ruth as one of their own so many years before. As the minister pronounced Jot and Ruth man and wife, the old woman dabbed at her eyes with a delicate embroidered hanky. "Sometimes," Granny Ryder said, "God works in the most mysterious ways. That child was meant to be in Provincetown. It just took a miracle to bring her home." The Polly rode at her mooring, sails furled, in Provincetown Harbor, her mast silhouetted against the setting sun. A faithful vessel that had carried more than fish in her hold. She had also held hope, love, love, and the promise that sometimes, even if in our darkest moments, God watches over us all. And in the Bay of Chaleur, far to the north, the tides continued their eternal dance over a submerged rock that once held a blessing, a reminder that some stories are too extraordinary to be anything but true. Thank you.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. You better hurry up and write that book. I want to read that again. I want to read that. Wow. What a way to end this, huh? Wow. I don't know what to say. So, I do want to mention that Russell Sanderson and Chris King were going to be part of this, but had to cancel for reasons of their own. But I want to thank again Yvonne and Rachel, and Peter, Maria, Mel, and lastly Lisa there. We do want to thank the Crown and Anchor for hosting this. And yeah. And you know, who said great poets need great audiences, and we had a great audience, a good group here, and thank you all for being here. And wow, let's do this again. And happy blessing, everybody. Wait, thank you to Peter too for recording all this.
He'll have this when it gets edited up. It'll be on PTV.
Okay, PTV, great.
Word will be out on that.
Great, we can all hear these stories again. Great, thank you all, thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.